Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Benchmarking Consumer Demands, Delivering Care Beyond the Clinical. Before we get started, I'd like to announce a few brief housekeeping details. Today's session is being recorded, and an online archive of today's event will be available a few days after the call. I'd like to remind you of HIP's antitrust statement and ask that you reference it in the Handouts tab. The antitrust statement prohibits us from discussing competitively sensitive information. You may ask a question at any time during the presentation by typing your question into the Q&A box located on the right side of your screen and pressing Enter. If you have trouble seeing the slides at any time during the presentation, please press F5 to refresh your screen.
Thank you, Catherine. And with that, let's begin. I'm Ash Needham, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. We are very fortunate to have with us today Roberto Royce from Humana and Drew Schiller from Validic. Roberto leads the Discovery and Strategic Partnerships team for digital health and analytics at Humana. The team scouts the best external partners to help Humana solve challenging business problems and to take advantage of new market trends in innovative ways. The goal of the team is to ensure Humana continues to be the partner of choice for the industry. Roberto was previously part of the Humana Health Ventures team based in Palo Alto, where he made investments in several digital and virtual health companies. Before joining Humana, Roberto worked at Arthur D. Little. Roberto, incredible accomplishments. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Drew is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Validic, the market leader in platform solutions for personal health data. Drew is solving foundational data and workflow challenges in healthcare, connecting data from patients' in-home clinical and consumer health devices with a provider or health plan. With a mission to improve the quality of human life through technology that makes personal data actionable, Validic is helping to power health and wellness programs for millions, with organizations like Kaiser Permanente, Optum, Weight Watchers, and of course, Humana. Drew regularly speaks and writes on a variety of topics, including advancements in consumer health data and standards, the future of digital health technology, as well as the ROI and opportunities in remote patient monitoring. Drew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now that we've really set the stage for the incredibly accomplished speakers leading today's webinar, let's talk through what we'll be discussing. Our goal today is to understand how organizations can benchmark their innovation against the industry to better meet consumer demands. We'll discuss the different ways organizations are addressing total health, how plans are meeting members where they are, and in what ways new technology and data are shifting the industry's focus and execution. Drew and Roberto are here to educate us. So with that, let's begin. Drew, why don't you take a few minutes just to walk us through an overview of consumer expectations and to really educate us on why organizations must deliver an integrated member experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ash. So I'd like to start today by sharing my most memorable customer experience that I've ever had. And what this was about 15 years ago or so, I was with my wife in Barcelona. We went to a really nice restaurant that was much nicer than we realized when we went there. And when we got there, we asked, table for two, and they asked if we had a reservation. We said no, and the host sort of smirked at us and said, "Well, we don't have anything available, but maybe go stand over there in the corner for a little bit, and we'll see what we can do." And so my wife and I were standing there and talking for about 20 minutes and trying to figure out where else we would go to get a meal that evening. And after not too long, the host came over and said, we don't have any tables tonight. We're all booked up, but if you'd like, you could sit at the bar. And we thought, this is a really nice place. I don't know if sitting at the bar is quite what we had in mind, but okay, sure. So they led us to the bar. We sat down, and the first thing that they did was they cleared everything off of the bar in front of us, and they laid out a white tablecloth with full place settings and a flower as a centerpiece. We were like, whoa. I mean, this is as if we were sitting at a table. We had no idea. It totally blew our expectations. And the food was incredible. It was one of the most memorable meal experiences of my life. And honestly, without that sort of wow factor up front of resetting my expectations and putting, a tablecloth in front of us, I probably would have felt underwhelming because it was a very pricey dinner where every dish had its own unique silverware and plates and everything. It was a 10-course tapa style dinner, and sure, we would have still eaten that wonderful food and they would have accommodated us, but personalizing that experience really made us raving fans of that particular restaurant. And the two key takeaways there was, first is that it was a really small effort on their behalf to personalize that experience, and that tablecloth and place settings up front made all the difference in the world. And the second is that making that simple accommodation is really what helped turn me and my wife into a raving fan. And in the past, this was a very hands-on sort of special request type of situation that would be really difficult to replicate at scale. Certainly would be difficult to replicate in a industry as large as healthcare. But with technology, this level of customization is actually starting to become something that's possible. So with technology, we can really take what used to take a big human capital effort and really reach people in new ways. And so an example of this is in another industry is with Spotify. Technology is totally making personalization possible at Spotify. You can see here some of people's tweets. At this point, Spotify's Discover Weekly knows me so well, if it proposed, I'd say yes. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience with Spotify or another application where you're like, wow, how did they know I'd like that thing because I didn't even know that? What's unique here is that Spotify approaches personalization from a number of different angles. They don't actually use sort of just one basic model. Instead, for this particular Discover Weekly tool that they have, they actually use 3 different models. They mix together 3 different strategies that they sort of picked up from other areas around technology. One is a collaborative filtering model, which analyzes both your behavior and others' behaviors that sort of look like you. So they kind of start to group people in how they think you'd like to respond, or how they think you'd respond to something. The second model they use is a natural language processing model, which analyzes text, the text of the songs that you like, the text of the songs you tend to gravitate toward. And then the third is an audio model, which analyzes the raw audio tracks themselves and looks at the kind of songs you like from a tempo perspective, from musical instrumentation, things like that. And those 3 combined lead to a highly curated experience that really makes Spotify members feel like the service knows them intimately. And so how do we translate that into healthcare? So to meet customer demands in healthcare, we have to deliver a similar integrated digital experience that helps individuals feel supported in their health goals. Now, obviously, we're not going to recommend playlist tracks or things like that for folks in healthcare, but what we do want to feel like is we want folks to feel that that as plan members, they are part of, we are there as part of their journey. And so 2 key trends I'd like to highlight here and opportunities for some of this digital customization are in workforce productivity and in senior care. So in today's workplace health incentive programs, they're so well integrated into daily life that they can be really a motivating function for health outside of the workplace. So for example, if you look at the challenges that are in front of us, the workforce productivity loss is a $2.2 trillion problem. It's like 12% of GDP. And the costs associated with that are from chronic disease, work-related injuries and illnesses, stress, and employee disengagement. It's a very, very big problem. And employers are really seeing that the value of happy and healthy employees really starts to add to presenteeism. And it doesn't stop just at the workplace. It's all centered around the person and the lifestyle and really meeting each individual employee where they are with their state of readiness for change and their state of readiness to engage in health programs in a new way. And that's one area where we can really leverage this personal digital experience for each individual employee in the workforce. The second area is in the Medicare Advantage space. So MA plans, as we know, are expanding their offerings to promote well-being, not just traditional healthcare, as well as just better preventive services. And there's a real opportunity to take further steps in the engagement. For example, as you see here, 75% of plan beneficiaries say that their MA plan does not offer any level of personalization. And 60% of Medicare Advantage beneficiaries say their plan does not offer any incentives to take actions. For example, go to an annual doctor visit in order to better manage or improve their health. Those are real opportunities that can be customized down to the individual to really start to engage plan members in ways that are beneficial for them. And 3/4 of Medicare beneficiaries, the ones who say that they offer no personalization, what they said was the plans just offer really generalized advice. And so in both of these cases, what we can do is take personal health data to deliver a personalized health consumer experience. So if we look at this graphic today, health information really comes from different sources, and it's kind of all coordinated. So members may have health apps and devices they're using to manage a chronic condition, for example, or to use while they're exercising regularly. And then they interact with a nurse in a call center or a clinician, whether it's a PCP or a virtual visit. And those clinicians are all reviewing sort of stale health record data or generic care plan guidelines that don't actually factor into what's happening day to day for that individual. And this can make health choices really confusing and frustrating for the member and lead to less than ideal health choices because the member is saying, well, this doesn't really apply to me. And so by bringing personal health data and home health information and clinical data guidelines together into a common interface, then technology and healthcare professionals can better guide consumers on healthy choices and help them make the right decision for each person easier. And that's what I think the opportunity with personal health data and being able to combine the ecosystem together is to really help folks make better health decisions in a way that is supportive of where they're trying to go in their own health journey. And so with that, I'm excited for Roberto to share more on this from Humana's perspective.
Drew, thank you. Could not agree more. We really appreciate you walking us through how technology is really evolving to enable this greater personalization and coordination. So Roberto, over to you. We're looking forward to getting deeper on your insights for how consumer demands are really shaping digital health and innovation in analytics.
Great, thanks. And I guess just to kind of piggyback on some of the comments that Drew made, right? I think specifically around the lack of care coordination, I think we can all agree that due because of that lack of coordination, consumers today, believe that care is very variable, that care is basically impersonal, that is disconnected, that is deficient, and that is imposing. And all that kind of lack of coordination also somehow leads to this kind of inefficiencies that creates in the system. And again, if you look at the amount of money we spend as a country, around $3.2 trillion in healthcare, right? And there are some interesting facts out there that if it's basically an economy, it will be right after Germany. So it tells you about the vast opportunity that it represents for us to make the healthcare system better and bend the cost curve and really make it more personal to that consumer. So this kind of reinforces a bit on what Drew was touching on his slides. Given that kind of lack of coordination that exists and inefficiencies, there's also something that we're noticing, and it's basically that consumers are becoming more powerful, right? And their expectations are also rising. They're becoming more super informed, what we call super informed. They definitely have more information on their hands, and they want to have that information to really push the system to be more transparent, right? And I think that's and really look at the facts, right? And why is that happening? Why that's probably the best option for me or not. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago, and who was telling me, transparency is going to be the new economy of scale. So there might be something there. Has a point there in terms of how informed these consumers are becoming. They're me-centric, right? So I think we can all agree that they're looking for that very relevant experience that really tailor their needs and requirements, right? They're looking for that specific thing that really helps them solve a specific problem, solve a specific pain point, and close a specific gap. So me-centric is something that we're seeing too in terms of shifting consumer expectations. There's also this fascinating idea about crowd-powered, right? They are becoming more, how do they become bigger, and how do we become more influential as they build and plug into new networks, so they can become stronger. But they also use the power of that to really get more access to information, to really validate information, and get, again, trying to get into that transparency piece that is very important for consumers today. And I think lastly, what we see also, and I think we all agree on this, is they're looking for that always on, right? If I need everything, I need it today, not tomorrow. I'm looking to have this product in my house today. And somehow that in healthcare applies as well. As we look at always on, how do I get the best care at the site of my preference, whether it's in the home, in the office, and how do we make sure that we're ready for that future of the consumer expectations that are looking to always be on and always be connected and always get that service when they need it. When they need it, and also intervene at the moment that matter for that member. I think that's an important thing to mention too, which is the fact that patients and members are not always thinking about their health. But definitely when you intervene at that moment that matter for that member, that's when you increase value, you increase that member experience, and members feel secure and assured that somebody's taking care of them. So with those two kind of highlighting the context and the situation, we also see these trends of boomers kind of being revolutionaries, right? And I think the fact that we believe that as we look at the trends in the future that they're going to be healthy, that we're going to have healthy members and healthy patients is probably not necessarily what the trends are saying and studies are saying, right? So 60% of boomers will have 2 or more chronic conditions by 2030. That's the case of the population we serve as Humana. We're going to have more over 65 than under 5, right? So again, the pyramid is going to be inverted somehow. We're going to have more senior people out there in the system. Boomers have fewer kids and more divorces. That also implies and have multiple implications in terms of how you think about depression, loneliness, and isolation. They're not necessarily going to be old. They're going to be blind and disabled. So how do we tackle that, and how do we get ready for that future as well? A lot around cognitive impairment. There's going to be more persistence around that, and also the fact that diabetes and obesity are going to still rising in seniors is definitely a fact. So how does that impact, and how do we get ready for that future to better serve them? So that leads me to the fact that all this kind of factors in terms of shifting consumer expectations, uncoordinated care, and all this idea around new demands of consumers, there's definitely this need for shifting innovations and to really meet those expectations of consumers. So we need to think about how do we know them better, right? How does our data or strategy data actually predicts and personalize our consumer needs? And I think Drew was touching on this as well. They want, how do we assist them anywhere, right? Is what the critical moment could or brand assist our consumers? When can we intervene at the moment that matter and help them faster? How we might help them faster, identify the right care at the right time. I think those are kind of the 3 major things we're seeing as well, and why we believe data and analytics are very important to accomplish these 3 things. And lastly, I will say, given all that context and situation, at Humana we have unified all this clinical, consumer analytics, pop health capabilities under the same umbrella on what we call digital health and analytics to really streamline and improve the experience of our members and providers. And the whole purpose of this is how do we build a healthcare system that is simplified, connected, and personalized. And I think that's pretty much why the HNA exists today, and it's an organization that's been created a year ago, so it's quite new, but driving a lot of this shift in expectation of how do we become more of a healthcare delivery company with elements of digital solutions that will empower members to take better care of their chronic conditions, that will allow us also to improve that member experience, and that will allow us also to think about the home as the new focal point for value-based care. As members want to age in place, as we want to keep them out of the hospital, and as we want to avoid ER visits as well.
Roberto, thank you. You really dove deeply into this idea of the informed, me-centric consumer, and I hope we continue that conversation throughout the Q&A. So let's get into the details with our panelists. We have some slated questions and urge you all on the call to submit your own questions for our speakers using the Q&A box located on the right side of your screen. So you both talked about how consumer demands are really shifting the need for digital and human touch points. What are some of the initial opportunities you encourage health plans to take that really incorporate personal health data as a means to better understand people's lifestyle and to really move the needle on health outcomes? Drew, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. There's I see a few opportunities. One is with health incentive programs, which I think is really low-hanging fruit and something we all understand pretty directly, also called wellness programs oftentimes. But, for example, in fact, Validic is working with Humana and the Go365 program, which is driving health incentives for employer groups and other populations. And, I think that what we've seen is that the health incentive programs are really starting to move the needle in terms of not just engagement, but also in terms of reduction in utilization and a reduction in claims. And what's interesting for me is that health incentive programs seem to be starting to go beyond just sort of step tracking and challenges like that. And we're starting to see incentive programs that have been built and rolled out around disease management and tobacco cessation, among other use cases, which is really exciting to me. I think it's nice to have an incentive chassis that can go beyond just the traditional wellness sources and start to bring in data to really help with disease management. The second area is remote monitoring for members with chronic disease. So, for example, one of the clients Validic works with is Kaiser Permanente, and we work with them on a remote monitoring program for their members that have diabetes or hypertension. This is actually one of the largest remote monitoring programs of its kind. There's over 30,000 members being actively monitored for diabetes or hypertension. And this is deployed inside of the clinical workflow for the nurse care managers and physicians to be able to access the information inside of their virtual care center. And the results are really strong. For the patients in the diabetes program, within the first 3 months, there's an average A1C drop of a point, which is extremely relevant clinically. And most interesting for us, one of the most interesting things for us is that 80% of the clinicians say that who have members enrolled in the program say that this program saves them time. And so anytime you roll out a new program for clinical team members through technology, and 80% of them say that it saves them time, I take that as a huge win because so often we put new technology in place and it actually becomes more of a burden. There's also a really high net promoter score for the members enrolled in the program, which is a 54. That puts the program, on par with consumer technologies like Netflix and Tesla. And there are other remote monitoring programs that are possible beyond just chronic diseases for acute programs such as heart failure, joint replacement, things like that. And then the third way I think that there's an opportunity for personal health data is in home health monitoring programs. And we're really seeing these pick up momentum, especially as care shifts further from hospital to the home. And with our growing aging population in the United States. And so, this includes passive monitoring solutions such as PERS devices and home health devices like blood pressure cuffs and weight scales that can really provide valuable insight into how individuals are living and thriving in the home.
Sure, thank you for that. Roberto, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think, Drew kind of nailed it on all the points, but I think that's why we believe Validic is a key partnership for us as we think about consolidating all our data into a single place, right? If you think about data in the healthcare system, even within Humana, data is silo, right? So the whole strategy for us is how do we bring all that data together into the same place, whether it's the cloud, for example, and start thinking about the longitudinal record of that member. That is what really is going to drive healthcare personalization. So right now, you might have a picture of Roberto. In order for us to complete that picture, we need new sources of data as well that might be coming from devices our members are currently using, that might be coming from devices in the home. So all that integration that Validic is doing is key for us to complete that picture of that member and really drive personalization for our members.
Great point. Thank you, Roberto. And let's start this next question with you. How can plans really leverage these data to better engage Medicare Advantage beneficiaries with available but also new offerings?
Yeah, so I think, we kind of touched briefly on this on the previous question, but in essence, it's fascinating. When I joined Humana 5 years ago, it was all about, we own claims data, right? We have everything we need. And if you come into the future now, 5 years after, you say, we need new sources of data. So, because, claims have the legacy effect and all that. So I think for us, it's this idea of how do we really start going after a data play here? How do we actually become more, at some point, more of a company that has elements of some tech companies as well? And how do we start leveraging data? And how do we start even leveraging, at some point, AI machine learning as well, as we think about really getting into the personalized health? So it goes back again to what I mentioned in the presentation. It's not about providing a lot of options to our members. Member wants optionality, but it's really about intervening at the moment that matters for that member. So if you think about the concept of in-home care, and kind of Drew mentioned around in-home space, imagine a world where you have an ecosystem of some sort of devices and remote monitoring devices in home, where if an alert gets triggered, you know exactly how to intervene. And it's not by saying, and maybe by calling that member, or it's maybe by engaging to a virtual visit with that member. So I think that opens the aperture a lot on the type of services we can provide in the context of home. And again, I think our members want to age in place, they want to stay home. So the whole idea is how do we provide a better experience for that member in the context of home. So that's pretty much how we're thinking about data and the application of data. And lastly, what I will say, when you think about digital too, there's a lot of noise in the digital space, especially in healthcare, but we believe that a strong digital strategy has to be supported with a very strong analytics in the background to really drive their interventions and to really provide a member experience.
Completely agree. Drew, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, I think Roberto nailed it. And the one thing I'll add on there is one of the things that I think we've been telling ourselves for years now is that, folks who are 65 and older who would be eligible for these Medicare Advantage plans are not tech savvy. But if you think about it, this generation of, or this cohort of boomers that are aging into Medicare Advantage plans, they were in the workforce as computers came online, as cell phones became available. They're very tech savvy. And, in fact, my 89-year-old grandfather, who was not of the boomer generation, obviously, he has an iPhone and he's totally willing to FaceTime and use apps. And so I think that there's a perception that they're not interested in sort of being engaged through technology in this way, but I think that that's a dated perception. And in fact, I think exactly what Roberto is saying, and I think is proving true, that you can really engage this population in new ways that are exciting.
That makes a lot of sense and kind of leads up to our next question. Well, so how have health plans really shifted in recent years to address evolving members' needs and consumer demands? And then how do you really see these expectations and demands changing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so, I think the biggest thing is that, you said health plans, which I like, and so often we say payers. And, health plans are not just payers anymore. They really shifted their focus much more to being, as Roberto actually is saying, healthcare delivery companies, and taking a more proactive approach to risk management and really helping their members live healthier lives. And so, some examples there, plans are really, they've invested in virtual care and telemedicine strategies, which we all know. But those strategies are sort of moving out of pilot phases. I think they're really starting to increase in utilization, and we're starting to learn a little bit more about how to drive members to actually leveraging those services that are both more convenient for the consumer as well as lower cost to the plan. The other thing is that we're seeing a real growth in risk-bearing risk contracting with providers. So whether that's, plans partnering with primary care groups through ACOs or similar programs, or even, some plans are offering their own primary care or home health services. And I think that is a very interesting trend that I think we're going to see more of, where the sort of who is a plan or who is a payer and who is a provider, the lines are getting really blurred there. And I think that ultimately the consumer really benefits from that. If you look at what's happened with, for example, with CVS Health and Aetna, I think that's a really interesting merger, because you have the frontline minute clinics now with the health plan backend and all of the service delivery there. And I think that's the kind of partnership that we're going to see a lot more of. That it starts to become really interesting as you think about how the healthcare consumer looks at getting care. And I think that finally, big picture, plans are really just thinking about how to keep members healthier and lower healthcare utilization. I mean, it sounds so basic, but when, as Roberto was saying, when he joined Humana 5 years ago, it was all around, well, we have claims data, and that's a lot of data, and that's all we need. But now we see, well, okay, that's the claims data is good for rear-looking stuff, and that's of the point. That's a good sort of point in time of the 0.01% of the time that a plan member spends inside of a physician's office that gets billed for. But what about the other 99.9% of the time? What's happening in people's daily lives? What are their social determinants? What's actually going to ladder up to their clinical outcomes? It's not necessarily their lab tests, right? It's how they're spending their daily lives and who they're spending it with. And so I think plans are really thinking hard around how to drive value-based care in a new way and really be a partner to members as they work toward living healthier lives. And that could be staying healthy if you're already healthy, or that could be someone who's living with a chronic condition and maybe they just need help understanding how to better manage that condition so that they can feel better and be more productive, and also not develop a comorbidity, which is, unfortunately a fairly common occurrence.
Sure, great point. Roberto, would you like to add anything?
No, you can tell how Validic is highly embedded in our strategy as a company, as Drew speaks about it. But just to reinforce, definitely, our view is that thinking about this integrated platform that simplifies the consumer experience and improves clinical outcomes, right? And that has elements of being a traditional payer more into the back end, but also how do we think more about the tech-enabled type of approach that we want to take in order to deliver that care in the most effective and efficient way. I think that's an important element. And lastly, I will say, in order to accomplish that, we believe that successful home care, if we think about the context of the home, for example, which is a big priority for Humana, in that context, that home care delivery system has the potential to address three distinct patient needs, right? Which is provide convenient care, slow disease progression, and enable independence. And all that, of course, need to accomplish to all these elements in place. And data and analytics is going to be a big step for us in order to accomplish that. And lastly, for the other question about, coming expectations in year, well, there's a lot happening, right? I think Drew mentioned the Aetna CVS. Also, Walmart is highly investing in what I call the last mile of healthcare with, the new clinics that they're building. So there's a lot of new startup companies also that are rising in the Medicare space, are going after this space, like Devoted, Oscar, and CityBlock. So there's a lot of happening, and a lot of companies realizing, a lot of investors also being more patient as they place bets in these companies. They're going to take some time to scale as you build the network, but there's definitely a lot of attention as it pertains to the Medicare space, because that's definitely the area that's going to grow the most based on the numbers that I show and predictions of how we're going to have more more folks 65 and over as part of our healthcare system.
Great point, Roberto. And given your mentioning of Walmart, and Drew, you mentioned CVS, it kind of builds nice into this next question, which is, what role do you see these new market entrants like retail health companies playing in healthcare over the next 5 or so years? Drew, why don't you start us off, and then we'll kick it over to Roberto.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that the new market entrants are going to have obviously a massive role. I think that, there was actually just last week the role of Amazon, the New Haven company starting to roll out, and there's a little bit of a womp womp with the rollout because it sort of looked like 90s style HMOs was kind of the trash that I was seeing talked about on Twitter and other places. But I think that that's just an initial foray, and I think that what Roberto mentioned with Walmart is extremely intriguing. I think you're seeing Apple start to invest in clinics for its team members, and I think what we're going to really see over the next 5 years is a lot of big companies that have traditionally been adjacent to healthcare but use healthcare for their own employees start to experiment more within their own employee base, and then potentially start to expand that out to other folks. I think that's where I really see the new market entrants making the biggest plays. I think that's where, that's how the Haven partnership between JP Morgan Chase and Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway started, was how can we manage our million plus employee population healthier together. And I think that, we'll also actually see probably some pretty interesting moves from some of the incumbents. With health systems, I think we're starting to see a lot more interest in direct contracting and programs like that as they start to say, well, how do we prevent ourselves from being disintermediated in this situation? And I think we'll start to see further consolidation amongst the existing healthcare players as well, as they start to gear up and think more creatively around how do we merge the plan coverage with the care delivery, whether that's going further into primary care, whether that's new opportunities in virtual care and telemedicine. But I think that what's most exciting to me really is that it's kind of difficult to predict what the next 5 years will bring, and that's personally really exciting. So I'm just really looking forward to seeing it, and I love all of the innovation and testing that we're seeing going on, and I think ultimately we as healthcare consumers are the ones who are going to benefit, because the goals of all of these programs is to add transparency into healthcare, lower utilization, reduce the cost of care, and make it much more efficient and effective and affordable.
That's a good reminder that we're all healthcare consumers in every stage of our life. Roberto, what about you? How do you see the impact and role of these new market entrants?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting time, because it also adds pressure in full transparency to companies like us as well. But that's also a way for us to really be on top. And how do we innovate, and how do we think about ourselves too? And as you add more competition into the system, that really promotes this whole idea of how do we change and how do we disrupt some of the the current health system that exists. So I think all these trends that we see, all these new entrants trying to play a role in healthcare, I think at the end brings benefits, right? It brings benefits as you increase the competition, as you rise the expectations, as you improve the member experience, as Drew was mentioning. And I think, a clear thing is what Amazon is doing. The latest news that they acquire Health Navigator, which is a startup company focused on care coordination, right? So they're taking some of the steps needed in order to start creating that ecosystem, and mostly think about applying and learning and what we call test and learns internally to their own associates, to then think about how to deploy this at scale across the system. So for me, it's an interesting journey. As I mentioned before too, I think there is a lot of other startup companies are starting to get into this space, especially in the Medicare space, as you think about devoted health, and also in the Medicaid space with Cityblock coming in. Interesting companies as well that are bringing kind of a unique value prop that is also, pretty much aligned to the consumer, changing expectations and bringing a different value prop and a different way to serve those members, with, highly kind of analytics in the back end too. So all that serves to I somehow put pressure on the system to really drive change, and when we believe, and we as Humana are all in favor for driving and promoting that competition that we believe needs to exist. So that's what I think, and for that specific question.
Thanks, Roberto. Yeah, great points. And you mentioned changes to the Medicare space and sort of how that's evolving consumer expectations. What opportunities do health plans have for sustaining engagement with Medicare Advantage beneficiaries and really moving us beyond this sort of 12-month cycle that we've been in?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question too, and we kind of asked that question internally. And if you think about the Medicare space, is this 12-year cycle, which somehow I believe is not necessarily the best experience for the member, right? It's almost like you need to do your taxes every year, which is which is somehow an experience you need to go after. But also it's the same here, that every year you need to roll out into your Medicare plan and benefit. So I think the question is, what if it's somehow there might be opportunities in the future where you somehow operate outside the 1-year cycle? Is that something that is going to happen? Well, I don't know, and I don't think we have a question today, but it's more about aiming again to what is the best way for us to start thinking on providing a better experience for our members. That is not only about selling a benefit or a plan. It's more about selling assurance to that member, right? To that person, that person feels secure, that someone is taking care of them in the back end. And goes back again to my previous point, when it's all about intervening at the moment that matter. When something happens, when there is an alert that gets triggered, and there's a situation when you need to intervene, you intervene and you are there. And that's somehow what I think about where healthcare of the future might be. I don't know, maybe an analogy I would like to use is it's almost like knowing and intervene before even an event will happen, right? When you go into Google as a search engine, remember those days when there were a bunch of search engines out there, right? And I think we can all agree that Google basically won that battle somehow. When you go into a Google search and Chrome, before you even type something, they already know what you're looking for. Is there going to be such a thing in the future that somehow replicates that into healthcare? Well, I don't know. Maybe Horizon 3 or Horizon 4, who knows? But I think definitely in order to get there, it's all about the data play, right? How do you make sure that data is consolidated, that it's no silo, that it's all in the same place where it needs to be, where you can have all your governance in place around data and how do you manage that, which is totally understandable. But once the data is all in the same place, there's a lot of things you can start doing with that to really drive that personalization, to really think about maybe the 1-year cycle in the future and think more about a sustainable kind of plan that is going to be always there for you, always on. So all of this are what if, right? I don't have that crystal ball to tell where we're going, but definitely I believe there's a big opportunity to at least make take the small steps for what we're doing. That is, first start to consolidating and aggregating all the data. Once you have all the data aggregated, then start thinking about the LR, longitudinal record. And once you have the full picture of that member, how do you start then applying interesting analytics? How do you start leveraging maybe AI, machine learning that we all know that it's not there yet for specific things, but how do you start leveraging all that information to really create that care delivery experience? And really, provide more of assurance than just a benefit plan. And even inside Humana, we say, we're very good at building benefits and plans. We need to become better at building new products and services. Whether they're going to be digital-enabled products, whether they're going to be data analytics products. That's the journey we're in. That's the learning journey we're embarking right now.
Thanks, Roberto. Great points raised, and thank you both for your insights. So now we're going to move on to the audience's questions, and we've received several. I know people are anxious to get your thoughts. So with that, let's dive in. Roberto and Drew, you both mentioned how machine learning and how analytics are going to sort of transition us to a new phase of personalization. Drew, can you talk a little bit about the ways in which machine learning or data science will help us perform better interventions, better coaching, and better personalization of programs?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple of things there. So this is an area that we think a lot about at Validic, we have quite a significant body of data from personal health apps and devices and in-home monitoring devices that are FDA listed. And so really we look at this in a couple different ways on how the data from these devices can start to drive interventions from coaches and nurses and clinicians. One is around prediction. So as you start to develop a large body of data, you can start to look at trends. So for example, we can predict when someone's going to stop using a wearable device with a pretty high degree of accuracy. We provide confidence scores for that. We can also predict blood glucose values a week in advance. That gives opportunities for interventions and things of that nature. And those predictive scores can really drive new kinds of conversations as you're reaching out to members and understanding what's going on for them and how they're feeling, and hopefully helping them to stay engaged or to stop, or to prevent them from having an adverse reading. The other thing is that, and this sort of gets back a little bit to the Spotify example I talked with, which is around grouping and clustering and starting to look at how not just you are likely to perform in a particular program or what your readings are possible to be, but also how others who are like you are starting to perform. And so from then you can take, for example, with Humana, all of the great claims data, which used to be all of the data, right? You can take the claims data and potentially lab information and other clinical data, and marry that up with the remote monitoring data, and start to look at, well, who are the cohorts of folks that are doing well, or that look like each other, that maybe responded really well to this kind of program. Okay, so if they responded well to this kind of program, then you as a new member, you look a lot like those people, so we're going to put you into this kind of incentive program or coaching program or something first, versus you over here, it looks like you actually don't engage very well with maybe a telephonic coaching. Maybe you need a video visit program or some other kind of program that will help you meet your needs better, because you're more like this other group over here. So I think that's some areas where we can start to get down to the personalization. It is, relatively early days for healthcare utilizing the vast amounts of data that we have available to us to customizing this approach, but we're pretty actively working with our clients in this space, and it's a pretty exciting time, and we're starting to see some really encouraging results.
I love that. That's great to hear. Roberto, anything to add on the value or impact of machine learning for healthcare of the future?
Yeah, so I think our perspective is thinking how do we start doing and applying AI machine learning at scale. So it's a new journey we're embarking in as a company. There is a lot of things that Drew mentioned there as we think about predictive modeling, right? How do we start thinking about predictive modeling as it pertains to chronic condition management, right? Is there a robust model that can allow us to predict whether a member will go into a CHF exacerbation or a cardiac arrest? So all that are things that we definitely think about, because that allows you, again, as I mentioned, to intervene even before an event happens. So as you do that, there's a strong value definitely for the member, because you might avoid a cardiac arrest or a complication. There's definitely a lot of value for us because we're delivering a better member experience, but also you are reducing, potential healthcare. You're bending the cost as well as you avoid maybe an ER visit or as you avoid a hospital readmission. There is also a lot of, so that's one kind of one fold as we think about chronic condition management with the different limitations that exist today also as you apply AI machine learning. The second fold, it's around how do you start applying also some elements of AI machine learning to help refer the member to the most optimal site of care, right? So if simple things as, if you're engaged in some sort of interaction with Humana over a chat or something, how do we provide the best information for that member in terms of how much copay they have left, and what are the benefits that the health plan includes, and how do we provide that transparency and better inform the member about the benefits in place. So those are elements where we also trying to apply AI and machine learning. And then so more about transparency and better inform members. And then the other point I mentioned around how do you refer the member to the optimal kind of level of care, right? It could be the situation, I don't know, if you think about behavioral health, right? As a member interacts maybe through some sort of a smart chatbot, for example, and you can determine that definitely that member might need and go and visit a psychiatrist or a psychology, and how do you provide that advice? And for me, it's all about providing optionality to the member, right? There might be a situation where AI offers that scenario where, depending on what I need and what I'm looking for, you might be referred to a virtual care visit, or you definitely need to go to the ER, or you might just need a call with a nurse or a caregiver. So all that allows us to really think about how do you deliver that care in the most effective and efficient way. Also, when you think about the in-home care, that becomes very important because as you, in order to deliver in-home care at scale, you need to be very effective and efficient, right? And you need to make sure that you deploy the right resources at the moment that matter for the member, but also depending on the situation that member is going through. So all that somehow links to how we're thinking about future applications, as well as current applications of AI and machine learning.
Roberto, we appreciate you walking us through that. And this question is actually very specifically to you, more about the Humana Studio H program. Someone asked about examples of how you guys are applying the Know Me, Assist Me Anywhere, and Help Me Faster to your programs.
Yeah, so Studio H is for those of you that probably I don't know the details, but it's been around for 1 year now. It's based out of Boston, the Seaport District. It's a beautiful space, and when you just go there into that Studio H, you feel like you're basically into a tech company. You know, you don't feel like you're in a normal kind of a Humana office. So the interesting thing about that is how do we start thinking about applying or design principles? So and within DHNA, we have or what we call Experience Center, right? Where these are all kind of designers, developers that are building the UX and the UI, the new products and digital products, and it's all through this rapid kind of a member experience method that we have, where we go learn about a specific space, we learn about a specific pain points of members, we might learn about a specific challenge a business unit is trying to solve for, and we just go deep, design and prototype faster in order to build faster products, right? And that's how pretty much the Studio H approach takes in order to go after specific needs and problems. And it's pretty much focused. The main focus is pioneering on new products and services that can be used across Humana broader integrated care delivery model, right? So we see Studio H and DHNA as enablers for our business to really drive this transformation, to really drive this change we're trying to make as a company. And more specifically, if you think about the priorities we're going after right now in the context of Studio H and also the product team that is involved in this, big focus around virtual care and how do we think about deploying virtual care at scale. And virtual care for us also encompasses elements of remote monitoring, so that's where Validic also plays a big role for us. And how do we think about provider care delivery? So we have what we call the Care Delivery Organization, CDO, where we're also trying to provide and better experiences for providers. We're trying to build new products and services as well that will deliver that will provide a better connectivity with providers, a better experience for providers as well. And we're doing that in-house. Most of that work is happening in-house, but we also believe that we cannot do this alone, right? So partnerships play a big role, and you probably also saw the latest announcement with Microsoft, which is a big thing for us as well. And all that complements this idea of building in-house when it's needed, but also leveraging partnerships in order to accomplish our vision. And that in that same context too, there's a lot of happening, as you probably know, around AI, machine learning, and predictive analytics. There's a large portion of folks based in Studio H also that are data scientists and engineers that are helping build this new change.
Thanks, Alberto. And Drew, you mentioned a little bit about the KP program and how those clinicians felt about the program saving them time and the high NPS results. We've gotten a couple questions about clinician engagement. How do you get clinicians engaged in using digital health?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thanks for bringing that back to what I was saying earlier around, 80% of the physicians who have members enrolled in the program that we support at Kaiser Permanente say that the program saves them time. And, one of the eye-opening things for me as part of that program and a few others that I've learned is that every clinician I've ever spoken with, and that's whether it's a physician or a nurse or someone, adjacently related, the reason they got into the field, into the practice of medicine, is to improve people's lives. And they so deeply care about the individuals that they're working with. And one of the challenges is that they just feel oftentimes like really burnt out and kind of beat down by the workload that they have in the system. And it sort of gets in the way of why they initially got involved. And so one of the things that I actually love about the kind of digital health technology that we try to work with at Validic, which is remote monitoring of chronic conditions and incentive behaviors, is that it really allows for a segmentation of the population, so that rather than trying to understand what is happening with all of my members and looking at just mountains of data that are coming in, which is kind of what people think about when they think about remote monitoring programs or things of that nature, and just, oh my gosh, but there's going to be floods of data, how do I deal with it? Is it really allows, if you're smart about how you set it up, it allows for segmentation. So you can have alerts on things that up front, that there's going to be something you want to know about when it happens with a particular member. So a reading goes way outside of a range, or there's a moving average of blood pressure over a week where the systolic blood pressure has increased by a certain amount. Those are alerts that you want to know about as a clinician, and you want to be made aware of so that you can care for those individuals, and know that if you're not getting alerts on the rest of the population, you can always spot check in on them, but you don't need to actually review the data necessarily in-depth on a daily basis. And so it allows you to really spend sort of less time checking in and more time just helping out with the members that really need to be looked at. And so the way that one of the things that one of the ways we deploy our programs is that we allow health systems and health plans to sort of put their own IP in terms of how they'd like to create a program and manage a particular population around a disease state or combination of disease states with devices. And it's really interesting because you can set up the program such that, for example, if it's a diabetes program, you can say, okay, well, if a member doesn't record a reading in 24 hours, I mean, that's something that matters, right? We want them to be taking their blood glucose every day. Is that something that we need to necessarily tell a clinician? Probably not. Do we need to let the patient know and remind them to take the reading? Absolutely. So you can set the program to, every 24 hours that someone doesn't record a reading, send them an SMS or an in-app message or a secure message through a portal, something like that. But if that reading, for example, isn't taken for 7 days in a row, well, now that's a concern, and that could be that the member's fallen out of compliance with the treatment program, or that could be that maybe their device isn't working and they think it is. But that's an opportunity for someone on the care team to reach out and just say, hey, what's going on here? But it ends up being a better experience for both the clinician as well as the member, because they're only really being engaged when there's something to be engaged on, and the expectations were set up front that, hey, when we reach out to you, it's because we really need to talk to you about this, and we're aligned with your health goals. We want to make sure you're healthy, and you want to make sure you're healthy. So we're in this together. So that sort of program of care is really the way that we've found that that clinicians stay engaged and ends up actually making them more effective in their workload.
Thanks, Drew. Great way to close this out. And Roberto, Drew, thank you both for sharing your thoughts and just your deeper perspective on the market. I think we're all walking away with a greater understanding of how consumer demands are going to change the future of healthcare. So thank you both. And
Thanks,
thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found the conversation both productive and informative. This webinar will be available on demand, and you will receive an email with the link to the recording within the next 48 hours. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you again for your participation, and enjoy the rest of your day.